The markets are always moving and reacting, and this is an overreaction to one practice in spring. But you know what? It's Wednesday. We get to go see a second spring practice at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, and Wednesdays are perfect for the stock market. That's Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. We get to head back in there another hour to evaluate and potentially overreact to, Bill. What did you leave on Monday thinking, you know what? I got to invest in it?
I'm hoping we get a chance to actually watch guys like practice against each other and react to that and overreact to that in a fun way. We didn't get to see that on Monday. It was just guys kind of running around. I would probably start with, I think we talked about him on one of the many shows we recorded since the Monday practice. I am rethinking, I suppose, like the impact that I believe CJ Donaldson might have just based off how he looks physically. Like I wasn't sure exactly what that would look like and if he would end up just merely being sort of a compliment more than a guy who's going to like really share the workload in a 50-50 manner or whatever that might look like this season. And all that was based off of just like what he might be able to handle from like a conditioning standpoint. Cause he was a bigger running back. He was a guy who played up over 240 pounds, I think, at times when he was at West Virginia. And some of those concerns, I don't even know if they were concerns really, but some of that thought process was changed hearing what Carlos Lachlan said about CJ Donaldson last week, but then seeing CJ on the field, just like looking definitely slimmer than how he looked at West Virginia, but also just kind of like gaining an appreciation for just how big of a running back he is, because he is, even though he has shed some weight, and I think will probably continue to do so. He still remains a rather large running back. You don't see a lot of running backs walking around who are quite as big as CJ Donaldson. So just impressed by like the work that he's put in, which I think is a good sign for what he's going to do in the fall. So I don't have a great feel just yet for what like the outside expectations are for CJ Donaldson, because I know people are excited about James Peoples, and I think people are rightfully excited about Bo Jackson. For a reason that Berm has laid out quite well in the past. But CJ looks like a guy who's like serious about making a run at the RB1 job in Columbus. So give me some CJ Donaldson stock.
It's pretty wild to see like multi-year veterans from other Power 4 programs come in and then still dramatically change their body. It's like,
yeah,
you know, this is not meant to gas up Mickey Marotti or Ohio State specifically, but I think sometimes you get we saw this with Will Howard a year ago. We've seen this with other players who've arrived, and it's like they had good training, they had good coaches, they had good support, and then they learn how to manage all that with what they're asked to do at those programs. But West Virginia and Kansas State aren't giving the same level of training, coaching, and support around the program as Ohio State is. And then you put those guys who know how to work and did everything that they were reasonably asked to do beforehand, and then ask them to do more with a veteran perspective, you see some pretty crazy results. Will Howard is going to probably go down as the most famous example of that. And we've seen 1 hour of practice with CJ Donaldson, but just looking at the way he appears to have changed physically is pretty remarkable.
Yeah. Cause you would think, or I guess I wouldn't assume this about any player, but it wouldn't be certainly outside the realm of possibility for a guy who is older, who's going to be looking to get like, whatever, that last college paycheck before he goes to make a run at the NFL, to just kind of be like content with where they are, right? I don't necessarily think Ohio State would recruit a guy like that. I think they're pretty good at discerning those kind of characteristics, but that definitely doesn't appear that CJ Donaldson is in that mode. Like I said, he's clearly done a lot in a short period of time, and he's got a whole lot of runway left before the season starts.
Yeah, the blueprint for Ohio State started there with Jonah Jackson back in 2019.
Yeah.
Like, you take a guy who's a pretty good player at a place that doesn't have all of the resources Ohio State has, and then you give them those resources, and they get even better. So CJ Donaldson definitely, again, we talked about him a few weeks ago. Like it has been forgotten, and it's been the case that way with a lot of these transfers that came in because the way the season went. I think we also, and I mentioned this, I think on a show last week, but we always kind of forget the guys who are in year 2 or 3. And we talk about the guys who are going to play, and we talk about the freshmen, and we gloss over other guys and think, well, if they haven't played by now, then they're not going to play. And I found myself on Monday, after all of the Devin Sanchez hype started to percolate, as we expected that it would, I noticed a a tweet from Aaron Scott,
I saw it too.
who's just like, hey, okay, I'm paying attention. And like Aaron Scott was a top 5 ranked cornerback
with the devil emoji. Don't forget,
Right.
Don't leave that part out. Yeah.
a 6'2", 200-pound corner who was a top 5 corner coming out of high school should not be forgotten at Ohio State. And I don't want anyone to think that it's going to be an easy road for Devin Sanchez to come in and move past a guy like Aaron Scott, who, they were with the twos together, but there's twos for a reason. There's 4 of them out, that's the 4th corner. And they're going to play. Aaron Scott has all the skills to be really, really good. And I think sometimes a player like him, because he's extremely competitive, finds motivation in hype around other players. And we've seen the same thing out of Jermaine Matthews in the last few years. And I think that Aaron is cut from the same cloth. And because I'm just going to jump ahead and take a second player here also, the same thing is about Malik.
What?
The same exact thing about Malik Hartford, who I think we need to stop assuming Jalen McClain is going to be the second safety next to Caleb Downs. And I think that based on the way the 2024 season went and all of the accolades Jalen McClain was receiving and the buzz from coaches, like Malik Hartford was still the first guy out there next to Caleb on Monday. And I don't, it's not a position where Malik is owed that because he's got any more experience than Jalen. Yeah, he's been in the program a year longer, but that's not a situation where he's being paid deference to. I think it's because he's the type of player that they need next to Caleb Downs. If you think about the complementary nature of Downs and Lathan Ransom last year, like that's what you need. Where Jalen McClain, I think, is a little bit more the same type of player as Caleb Downs.
You just want to take 3 or 4 more while you're at it?
Yeah, I mean, I can go down the list. I've got a handful if you want, but I'll let you have one if you're interested.
Well, I took Malik Hartford going into spring, so I don't need that one. But it was nice of you to snipe it from me anyway, so I don't have to reiterate that. I want to expand a little bit. I feel like it's the running back room as a whole after day one. I certainly agree with everything that Bill said about CJ Donaldson. Actually, on Monday when we were in the Woody, I kind of walked over to Bill. I was like, he doesn't look like what I thought he was going to look like. And so we're noticing some of that stuff in real time with him, but also putting him next to Bo Jackson, who looks like not what a normal freshman running back looks like. I was talking to Bo Bishop on the radio on Tuesday, and he was asking about the running back room and if Ohio State was content with what they had there and if they may need to look at that position in the spring portal window. And I understand where the question comes from, because this room compared to a year ago is so dramatically unproven compared to Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins being 1 and 2 in the backfield for Ohio State. But any running back group is going to be inexperienced compared to those two. And while James Peoples, was only working in reserve, CJ Donaldson has Power 4 experience. And if you look at the freshman class, they've not done anything yet. But I think if you're betting on the combination of Peoples with a year under his belt, Donaldson with the changes that he's made from West Virginia and the experience at that level, and then supplementing that with this freshman group, who I wanted to wait. Carlos Loughlin was really raving about Bo Jackson and the potential this year. I kind of wanted to I wasn't sure about the health and how much he was going to practice. Burnham had talked about that in the buildup to spring. That was probably more, he was going to get more activity than I was projecting or expecting coming off that injury, but just wanted to see it. I'd never watched him, really play or practice. I mean, nobody had. That was the first time he was doing it at Ohio State. So, but 1 hour was enough to kind of just look at him and be like, yep, I bet that guy can probably be just fine for Ohio State. So I guess I feel like maybe there's a perception that the stock is low right now, which is the perfect time to buy it, because I bet that they can fulfill that expectation. And if they do, Ohio State will be right there with one of the best backfields in the country again. Maybe not quite to the level of a pair of first round or top 2 round draft picks next spring. Like having Quinshon and Travion together is not a realistic thing to have every single year, but maybe James Peoples and CJ Donaldson at the top can come relatively close, and they might play more depth at that position than they did a year ago.
And Ryan Day brought up Turbo Rogers arriving in June or end of May when he gets to town, and Isaiah West, who's not participating. So like the room looks extremely thin right now with just the 3 guys, but they do have 2 extra incoming freshmen, and TC Caffey, who I think a lot of people think is good enough to play at a Big Ten level, pretty much, probably 65 to 70% of the league. So when you look at the room in totality, like, you can understand why they feel comfortable with the numbers they have. But if something were to happen this spring to one of those guys, then Bo's question becomes much more relevant, I think. But until then, Bo Jackson is the guy that on Monday when we were at practice, recruits were like, "Hey, who's that guy? Who's that guy?" Because they were like, I'm like,
who's that adult man?
Yeah, they're like, that does not look like a freshman running back. And I'm like, no, that's it is surprising how different Bo looks so quickly. So he's got a little aura.
What was his injury?
He just had a couple different things. He had a rotator cuff / labrum tear early in his high school career, then dealt with some just minor leg stuff that just kept creeping up. He just had a tough time staying on the field. Not some of that's because he was playing offense and defense nonstop when he was playing, and I think he just didn't really get a lot of proper load management. But the labrum is what cost him most of his junior year. So
I was just looking to see if he had like any kind of brace anywhere, and I didn't see anything. So I was like, oh,
no, it's never been like the traditional worries. It's not like there's been torn ACLs or anything like that. It's just been nagging stuff that's kept him from being the national level recruit that he probably should have been based on the way that he looks and the way he plays.
Got it.
Now, none of this would be to say that if a Quinshon Judkins reached out in the transfer portal in mid-April, that Ohio State would be like, nope, we're good. Don't need anything there. Of course, they would listen to that. But I know where the question and the perception is coming from. But my feeling is that Ohio State is not at a point where they're like panicked or even concerned all that much about the room that Carlos Lachlan has built right now.
It's a good looking room. It's young behind Donaldson, but there's everyone who was on the field on Monday looked like an Ohio State running back,
right?
Including TC Caffey. So yeah, I think they're fine at that spot.
What do you got?
My turn again?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know. Berm can go. Berm can just.
Berm picked 2 guys. You picked the whole position room. I don't know. Should I pick like 6 people?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go a little off the board. I think maybe. And it sort of falls in line with what Berm said about maybe forgetting sometimes about guys who were kind of in between. Peyton Pierce, because I think maybe this is with an assumption that perhaps Matt Patricia might cook some things up that get Sonny Styles and or Arvell Reese like out of the box sometimes, but you still might want someone there. And I think it's pretty clear to me that he's the third linebacker right now. Like the second group of linebackers through on Monday were Peyton Pierce and Garrett Stover, and they were only running 2 teams. So like, if they were running 3, I'm sure Riley Pettijohn would have been out there too. And there's obviously a very good chance that Riley Pettijohn can push for early playing time as a true freshman. I'm not writing him off in any regard, but James Laurinaitis likes Peyton Pierce quite a bit. Jim Knowles liked Peyton Pierce quite a bit, I think, before Jim Knowles left. It seems like the thing they like most about him is that he's just like smart and understands the defense and understands spacing and is good at anticipating things, and all of that I just think gets you on the field, even if you like look at the linebacker room and see a bunch of guys who are 6'5", and then there's Peyton Pierce who's like 6'2", maybe not quite as long as some of those guys. I think he'll make up for it with some football savvy that maybe is a little hard to see sometimes in a spring practice setting, but something about just like seeing him standing in front of the second team defense, like giving them a call and everybody getting lined up. It was like, this kid's a young player. He hasn't played a whole lot, but he seems to have a pretty good command of things on the field. So I think that could maybe lead to a larger role than perhaps we're anticipating because Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese are back, and I do expect them to play the lion's share of the meaningful linebacker snaps this year. But I think Ohio State will need more than 2, like it does at most positions. And if it does, maybe Peyton Pierce would be someone good to kind of buy low on now and perhaps reap some benefits down the road.
Yeah, we don't live in the same world we used to live in when it comes to transfers and the reasons guys transfer. But I think if you're wondering heading into spring, like why is Gabe Powers not linebacker number 3 at Ohio State? Mm-hmm. It might be because of the way the coaching staff views and raves about Peyton Pierce. And plus, it's not like he's unathletic. His name was Superman in high school. Like he's a freaky athlete who
he's a really good wrestler, right?
really good wrestler,
Yeah.
super smart, as you said, flies around, and he had a foot injury that cost him most of last spring when he got to campus. So he was a little bit behind, but now that he's emerged, you can see why he has it. He's also got like the best vibe about him on the team as far as like his haircuts, and he's just a dude that you like. Like, I don't go hog hunting or whatever like Anthony Schlegel, but I bet you Peyton Pierce does, and I'd like to go with him because he's probably just a guy who sits there and says like 6 words the whole time, and I'd imagine like of those 6 words, 3 of them are hog, and the other ones are there, like there, hog, there, and that's it. And I'm into that, so I love the pick of Peyton Pierce.
I think you just opened yourself up for a world of messages from the rest of the roster saying that Peyton Pierce and his haircut is setting the tone.
It's the great. When he cut his mullet last year, I was like heartbroken. And, you know, I know how much you guys like to talk about wrestling. I've asked him very specifically before if he's aware of Kerry Von Erich, the Texas Tornado, because that's who Peyton Pierce reminds me of, is the Texas Tornado.
You've got to stop forcing people to watch the Iron Claw.
If you don't know the story of Kerry Von Erich, the Texas Tornado, please look on HBO and find The Iron Claw. It's one of the saddest movies you'll ever see. But Peyton Pierce, as a kid from Texas, was well aware of the Von Erich name and the legacy. And he said he started to grow his hair back. And I think that's why, because I told him he couldn't cut it again. So,
okay. Well, you're making things happen.
Stock up on Peyton Pierce's mullet. Stock up on a guy that we're not going to talk about much because of the fact that he's a 5th-year tight end. And we talked about him a lot last year, and then he's now replaced by Max Clare as the primary tight end option for Ohio State. But I think Will Kazmarek is going to be so important to this offense heading into this season because the 12 personnel stuff is going to be more prevalent than ever. And because of the fact that Max Clare is not going to be often your traditional inline tight end, Will Kazmarek is going to be in that spot, even if Max Clare is lined up in the slot, or if you have a tighter package. Like, it's going to be a really big year for Will Kazmarek, and everyone's going to want to talk about Jelani Thurman. Everyone's going to want to talk about Max Clare, and the duo of Kazmarek and Bennett Christian are going to be overlooked. But I think that for this offense, they're going to be so much more important than the tight end was a year ago, and I don't want people to forget about him. And he's a leader, you know? Will's a leader.
I haven't. I wanted to push back immediately when you said that Max Clare is the number 1 tight end for this team. In terms of passing targets, for sure. But like, I think in terms of maybe snap count and definitely in terms of blocking responsibilities, Ohio State would look at Will Kazmarek as like the glue of that unit for sure. And one of the key cogs for the offense as a whole. Like, you're right. It shouldn't be forgotten. But I view it more of when Luke Farrell and Jeremy Ruckert, they're the shorthand for like the best version of complementary 12 personnel at tight end, in my opinion, that Ohio State's had in recent year. Like, which one would you have said was tight end number 1? Like, I thought the offense relied on Farrell more necessarily than Ruckert, but Ruckert was going to do more things as a passing threat. I think that's probably the same situation here. That's my opinion on it.
I don't disagree. I think that the priority, though, shifts in a world now where players are paid. And there's a reason that Max Clare came to Ohio State, and it's not to be the complimentary tight end to Will Kazmarek. So not that he's also not going to be put in a position where he has to learn how to be an inline blocker. Ohio State is still not going to just say, okay, Max, you don't have to learn how to do this, or this doesn't have to be a part of your game, because it does. But I think that what you'll see is him being used in so many different ways that it forces Will Kazmarek to be used in much more traditional, just 6th blocker type. And, you know, we saw him stretch the field a little bit for Ohio State when he was healthy this year. I'm excited to see if there's an opportunity for him to do that more this spring. As Julian's saying, with his quick trigger and the quick processing, I think the tight ends are going to be a huge part of this offense.
I concur.
All right. I think we can all agree on that. Speaking of guys who, I don't know how overlooked he is. I think everyone knows what the ceiling is for Brandon Inniss, but in a world where Jeremiah Smith, there you go. Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate exist, and I spent 2 months talking about watching Mylan Graham throughout spring. Brandon Inniss caught a drag route mesh concept pass from Julian Sayin on Monday that I just like can't stop thinking about it. Won't stop thinking about it. The pass was, we talk about the release and the ball coming out and it hit Brandon Inniss in stride, and then he just immediately turned upfield and he looked super fast like he always does. But he's another player that, you know, he was behind initially 2 years ago, didn't have that spring, the full complement of workouts and all that stuff. And we've talked about that. We've had conversations with him on the Notebook and in other places about catching up to speed and remaking his body, enhancing his physicality and all the tools that he's got. He should not be overlooked. And without a Mecca around, I think there's always this tendency to want to jump to the next thing. Like Brandon Inniss was supposed to be the next thing 2 years ago. And the fact that it hasn't happened to date the way that he would have wanted or we would have expected doesn't mean that it's not going to happen now. And if teams have to account for both Carnell and Jeremiah Smith extensively on the perimeter, they're going to get picked apart over the middle of the field, I think, by Brandon Inniss. And there's going to be a lot of opportunity for him. It's another person that just like needs to be remembered as part of the weapons that are at Ohio State's disposal. And I don't think that the coaching staff needs reminders of that. Brian Hartline doesn't need reminders of that. Ryan Day doesn't need reminders of that. He talked about him as one of those key leaders that you always feel, even at this time a year ago when Emeka Egbuka was still on the team. So I think inside the Woody, there's definitely an appreciation for that. And I don't even know that outside the Woody that there's not. But he hasn't been someone that we've spent a great deal of time talking about going into spring camp. And there were just a couple reps on Monday that I was like, yeah, I think it might be happening right now.
Yeah. We talked about him a lot. I think we're out in front of what's going to be a breakout year for him. I think you're right on it. Especially if he's involved in a return game too, which like I hope that he is.
There were like 11 guys catching punts on Monday.
There were a lot, including Jeremiah Smith.
You know why I love college football? Because of guys like Brandon. Because he was
not for the pageantry?
No. Well, I mean, he's part of the pageantry. He was
what
like
about the NIL?
I love that part more than anything. He was so celebrated coming out of high school. He was a guy that when he was in 8th grade, people started recognizing that he was going to be a major recruit. He comes to Ohio State, does all the right things, has not yet had his moment on the field that really people would have expected. Heading into year 3, we start to see like the body has changed. The baby fat that he even carried, even some of last year, is gone. And physically, he looks like just a different person. And so he's been able to like endear himself to the Ohio State fan base and the coaches for doing things off the field and doing all the right things. And I think about players like Terry McLaurin, who for 4 years, people are like, oh, I love Terry McLaurin, but is it ever going to happen on the field? Johnny Dixon, those types of guys. And like, so you have the people who obviously love and celebrate Jeremiah Smith because he gets on the field right away and blows up. But then like Brandon Inniss is just as important and appreciated and endeared by the Ohio State fan base. And I really love that dichotomy of the sport, to be honest.
It's beautiful.
All right.
Poetic.
I'm glad you said it. Yeah. Do I get one more? Or are we done?
You can have one more.
Okay. I don't know. I'm not anywhere near certain that this guy's going to be a factor, but we did mention him on the snap judgments after practice because you talked about the guys at punt returner, like Quincy Porter was one of them. And in my head, I was like, who is this tight end back there returning punts? He is just like physically way different than what I was expecting. I guess I could have just looked at his recruiting profile and realized what he was, but I did not expect at all to show up to the first day of spring practice and get a glimpse of the freshman receiver crop and think to myself, like, that guy looks like somebody who might make this interesting. And when I say make it interesting, I just mean like maybe be like in a rotational role. I don't think like Carnell Tate is looking over his shoulder, but Quincy Porter like did kind of hit me that way. He's like physical profile is different in that room, aside from Jeremiah Smith, whose physical profile is different than everybody's on the planet Earth. So I don't know where that's going to go, what that means for his freshman year. I understand it's an incredibly hard rotation to crack, and guys often have to wait their turn there unless they're freaks like Jeremiah Smith. So maybe Quincy Porter's not quite that, but he definitely looked like somebody who, if given some opportunities, might make some noise in the spring. So on the off chance that happens, I would think that stock is pointing up a little bit.
It's a good flyer to take.
Yeah,
it's insane when you think about how good Brian Hartline has been as a recruiter and the results that his groups have had on the field since he took over in 2018, because even I, someone who like spend all my time looking at recruiting garbage and recruiting rankings, and Quincy Porter is a composite 5-star wide receiver and no one talks about it. And it wasn't even like during his recruitment, because now it's not even like if being a 5-star receiver is what's really worth getting the discussion for Brian Hartline. It's like, unless you're a top 3 player in the country, then all of a sudden, because Jeremiah Smith has reset the expectations so much, I think, that any 5-star receiver, Mylan Graham, we've talked about a ton, now Quincy Porter, like they come in and it's like, oh, ho-hum, this is just another receiver, but he's a top 5 receiver in the country and a 5-star player on all the major recruiting networks, and no one's talked about it. It's pretty wild.
It is, I think, maybe the quietest 5-star recruitment Ohio State's ever had.
Like, it's insane. Like, and some of it is because kids these days don't really want to talk, and like they want to promote themselves without talking about themselves, which I think is a good juxtaposition. But
a good one.
Yeah, but it's like, because I don't think the kids should be sitting out there promoting themselves all that much and talking me. But I'd like to find a little balance where they, make the rounds on podcasts and stuff again, because it's good for them. But that's neither here nor there. If I'm going to take one more player, because I am obligated to legally, it's got to be Austin Sareveld. We talked about him a ton on Monday, and we're going to talk about him a ton the rest of the spring. He's proving himself to be exceptionally valuable for Ohio State, and it's something we noticed starting last August, and then we kind of forgot about him in the middle of the season. Then the playoff happens and he's hurt, and so we don't know who's going to take, like, at that point it's like, who's going to replace Austin Sareveld, and now he's a guy that obviously Ryan Day trusts quite a bit. They believe he can play all 5 offensive line spots, which is a huge boost and a boon to his stock, not just now but in the future. And I don't want him to be forgotten, because I think that there is a scenario where he's the 6th offensive lineman, and that doesn't change the fact that he's super important to Ohio State and good enough to be one of the 5, but his value is going to be well beyond just being a starter.
I'd say that the stock is up on being the 6th lineman. That used to sort of be a backhanded compliment. I don't know. This guy might not be good enough to start or play full-time reps. We're not sure if he's a tackle or a guard. He's right there in the competition, like, especially at Ohio State, especially coming off of last year. There's a different appreciation for why that is so critical. If you can play both spots and you have that many reps over the course of a season, like, if you're number 6, you're going to be on the field. And if you can get on the field at either guard or tackle or potentially center, like, even better. And I think that that's going to be reflected financially. It's going to be reflected in terms of snaps and playing time. We've seen that rotation even when Ohio State is healthy, getting guys involved in the field. I think that there's now Ryan Day was wearing out some of the theory versus testimony conversation on Monday, but that definitely applies to the offensive line and being the 6th man at Ohio State. You're highly unlikely to make it through 16 games or 17 games if that's what you want to play and remain 100% healthy the way that Ohio State did, in some of their better years, or 14, where they were a shoestring away and one never broke. Like, if you had to stretch out that length of season and take that gamble, you're probably going to lose. And Ohio State had to face that reality down in October and November of last year. And the fact that Austin Sareveld was part of that Luke Montgomery was part of that Tegra Shabola was part of that is really significant. I don't think you would have to go twist their arm to convince them that, hey, actually it is a good thing to be the 6th man. They'd be like, yeah, I know, I want to be part of this unit and help it. I think that has probably changed the perception for the better.
I would just like the record to show that I've always held the 6th offensive lineman in the highest esteem.
Well,
and everyone is catching up to me.
Whatever stock you hadn't already purchased now belongs to me. Berm took it specifically for Austin Sareveld, and I was going to do that anyway, so I don't have to make another pick. All he did was take all the ones that I wanted. He read my notes. I don't know how he did it. That's good. We'll see if we are again later today, which is Wednesday.
Wait.
Okay.
I just want to ask.
He has 6 more. Hold on.
I know we're pushing 30 minutes here on this episode of the podcast daily, but who cares? We're not in a hurry. We're not in a rush. we're heading into practice number 2 at Ohio State.
Mhm.
Who did you not take enough notice of on Monday that you're going to spend extra time watching and observing on Wednesday? Where would you say your attention is going to be?
Max Clare. I didn't watch the tight ends at all, but yeah. So and hopefully it's Max Clare running in coverage against someone who's trying to deny him the ball.
I spent most of my time on Monday, Berm, shading towards the offensive side of the field. As I always admit, I'm a simple man. I can watch the quarterbacks and feel like I have a better idea of what's going on there than pretty much anywhere else, at least at the start of camp and when there aren't pads going on. So I probably just need to. I didn't really watch the linebackers move around at all. I saw the heated competition on both sides of the field against the cans. So I had knew who was lining up where and what the pecking order, at least to start camp, might be. But I didn't really watch at the far end of the field to my right, the defensive line go through drills. Didn't watch the linebackers. I saw a little bit of the secondary, but I think everything in the back 7, I probably need to move further to the other end of the field than I was on Monday.
Yeah, for me, I think it's probably the 3-4 linebacker situation to Riley Pettijohn, TJ Alford, and Peyton Pierce, trying to assess that group against one another. Because when you see TJ and Riley, it looks different than what we've seen out of freshman linebackers at Ohio State before. And I think those two are going to continue to push. But and then I go back to the Aaron Scott conversation. I think we just get enamored sometimes when we see a new guy for the first time, and Devin looked like $1 million on Monday. And I'm interested to see Aaron Scott. I actually was having a conversation with someone, and
I bet it was more than $1 million.
Yeah. See, I told you he loves NIL. I told you.
We talked about it on Monday's Snap Judgments. Aaron looks the same as he did 4 months ago, and I in my mind I was instantly comparing him to how Devin looked 4 months ago, and that's improper and incorrect because I should have been comparing him to how Aaron looked last March. So I didn't spend a lot of eyeballs on what Aaron was doing on the field, but I want to see just how he is taking that fight, because I think it's going to be one of the better position battles to watch this spring. And it's not just Devin versus Aaron, but that entire group, because I think that Aaron and Devin are both talented enough to push both Jermaine and Davis Nigbinosin to move those guys inside, because I think there's an opportunity there. I'd like to see Aaron play inside, to be honest, if I was having my druthers, but no one asked me.
Yeah, no, I think that's still going to be one of the themes of the spring for me, is if that corner talent spills over to nickel and how that impacts it. But there's a long way to go. They're only on practice number 2, which is today at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. The podcast will be there with full coverage. We'll have some snap judgments. We'll have some interviews and some conversation about what we learned from the Buckeyes with another viewing period. And then we'll be back with the podcast daily for Thursday, which, as you know, there might be 3 things to talk about as we get to that point. There'll probably be way more than 3, but we'll figure that out when we get there. For Bill Anderson, Jeremy Birmingham, I'm Austin Ward. Thanks for joining us on this edition of the Podcast Daily. It's Wednesday Stocks. We'll talk to you later.